it's time to get going. Welcome everybody to our webinar on compostable plastics research, and this is we're doing these periodically throughout the research project, which is a 3-year research project on compostable plastics being carried out at UCL by the Plastic Waste Innovation Hub, and we're funded by the UKRI, National Environmental Research Council, and EPSRC. And the agenda for today is essentially just to sort of introduce you all and remind you of what the research objectives are for this project since the last time we talked to you all. And if you haven't already tuned into us to find out for the first time, and then I'll introduce our individual researchers who are working on the different parts of the research, and they'll tell you in person about the research they've been carrying out in the last 6 months. And then we'll have a question and answer session. So just to say, on the question and answer, you can ask questions all the way through using the Q&A tab, and you can also vote for other people's questions. So if you have a question about something that one of us has just said, do post it in there. Other people will be able to see that. They can vote it as being more as also the question they'd like to ask, and so on. And then when we get to Q&A, we'll have a look at the order of those, and we'll address the most popular questions first. We're a big team and we're multidisciplinary, so we span everything from chemical engineering, chemistry, behavior change, all the way through to public policy. And we're a diverse team. I'm not going to name everyone. You can see all the people in the current team up here, and you'll hear from many of them today. You can look at our website and find out more about us. So what is the summary of the research project? Essentially, we are tasked with trying to work out what a system for composting and producing compostable plastics would look like in the UK. And when I say a system, I mean a circular system. So how could it be that we can make plastics from waste residue crops or other biomass through chemical engineering, make them into biodegradable polymers, make them into compostable plastics, make them into products. Those products do their job, and then they get collected and they get automatically sorted. They do not contaminate other waste streams. They do not contaminate the environment. They end up at a composting site. They get composted. They end up back on the land, nurturing the biodiversity in the soil and sequestering carbon. That's our objective. And if we can work out how a system like that can work in the UK, we have, well, we'll have achieved our aim. And we've broken up into several objectives because parts of this process are already known. It's actually trying to get the whole system to work. That's the big problem here. And as many of you who are tuning into this webinar must know, that it's actually only if the whole system works that we actually have an environmental solution for compostable plastics. So objective 1 is, what is the environmental impact of industrial and home composting? So how much energy is used, and what happens to the environment once the compost is produced? Does it harm the environment? Does it enhance the environment? Objective 2 is, how can we improve the effectiveness of industrial and home composting? Objective 3 is, we're pretty sure we need automatic detection of compostable plastics. They're very similar in composition to many other plastics, and they can contaminate recycling streams. They can contaminate other streams, and being able to single them out is really important. We want to have a look at objective 4 is what is the effect of packaging design and labeling on customer behavior? Do they know when something's compostable? Do they know where to put it? Do they know that if it is certified compostable? Objective 5 is, which packaging should be biodegraded rather than recycled in the UK? We don't believe that all products are suited to this. Some will be better recycled and designed to be recycled. Others will be better to be in reusable containers. And the question is, that we will hope to answer with evidence is, well, there are some product types that are best suited to composting for the environment. And then finally, we want to put all this together in evidence-based policy recommendations for the UK to inform government policy and to help companies and citizens navigate this complex area. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. We have lots of companies involved and who are our partners. And of course, we have to have companies who represent all parts of that system. Otherwise, we'll never understand it. We need to get data. We need to work with them. And thank you all if you're part of it. And I apologize if all of the logos are not up there. But we will have them, the full number soon. So that gives you a summary of our research aims and objectives and who we're working with. I'm now going to hand over to individual research update on those questions. And the first one is Dr. Maria Bawn on biochemistry. Maria.
Hiya, so thank you for the introduction. So I'm just going to briefly go over our 6-month objectives. So I started back in May. I'm just going to show you some progress of what we've been making with each. So initially we want to develop the microbial consortia for the biodegradation of PLA and PBAT, so compostable plastics. When we've done this, we want to establish the analytical protocols, so how we analyze degradation products and how we actually find out what microbes are doing in these degradations. We wanted to consider biodeterioration and biofragmentation, so this means looking at techniques like scanning electron microscopy, so actually seeing the surface of these plastics and what is happening. We have set out to test PLA and PBAT degradation in vitro, so looking firstly at aerobic conditions. And also we wanted to link in some initial lab tests with biodegradable tea bags. So next slide, please. So the initial development of the microbial consortia for the biodegradation of PLA and PBAT. So how do we find these interesting microbes? Where do they come from? And how do we isolate them? So we start off by setting up some enrichment cultures. So enrichment is a really useful tool to analyze interesting microbes from an environmental sample. So in this case, compost samples. And then we're able to grow these microbes to detectable levels. So in this case, we're looking at compost samples from various composts. So I've highlighted those in the green box there. So we have some industrial compost samples, and these are our Belfast compost and Belfast leachate samples. We have a sample from UCL's own hot bin. We have a wood chip sample. So this is usually used as a starter agent to start up those hot bin composts. We have a home compost from John and Helen's tea bag compost. So what I would do is I would inoculate some growth media with these compost samples, and that and the growth media is used to help enhance the growth of the microbes. And then I would add some PLA and some PBAT pellets, and this basically kind of enhances the growth of the microbes that would be degrading the polymers. Next slide, please. So this is just a closer look at one of those enrichment cultures, so the tea bag enrichment. So Helen, she had some biodegradable tea bags that she placed in her home compost. So she put them in some a netted bag, which she could easily retrieve after 6 months. And the photograph here shows what's left of those tea bags after 6 months. And you can clearly see there's no intact tea bag left. So there's a lot of breaking down going on. So obviously we want to figure out what microbes are doing that. And so we set up an enrichment culture with those compost samples. And then these enrichments are then incubated at 37 degrees and also at 50. And they're just left, and I can take samples of those when I want to investigate what's happening. Next slide, please. So while those enrichments are incubating and those microbes are growing, we needed to figure out a way we can actually test degradation of these polymers. So we all know plastics degrade quite slowly, and this isn't ideal for our experiments. So we wanted to look at ways we can actually look at the degradation more rapidly. So this is one way is looking at polymer emulsions. So this is a sort of oil and water emulsion where we take our PBAT and PLA plastic, we dissolve it in an organic solvent, add some surfactant, which would ultimately stabilize the emulsion. and add some water. So we all know that water and oil don't really mix. In this case, our solvent and water don't mix. So we need some energy just to disrupt those oil droplets or solvent droplets. So we use sonication, and that forms a uniform emulsion, which I've got a photograph of my PLA emulsion there. So you can see it's quite an opaque, milky looking liquid. However, we do use organic solvent, which is nasty stuff and not very microbe friendly. So we have to remove that. It's just a quick step of evaporation. Then when we have this polymer emulsion, we can then start looking at different tests to see the degradation of the polymer using plate clearing assays and solution assays. So next slide, please. So the plate clearing assays, they're really simple assays, but quite effective. So when we take a sample from our enrichment cultures to look at the microbes in there, we put the sample on an agar plate, and then the microbes grow and we get colonies. However, when we add the emulsion to the agar plate is quite opaque. It's a white agar plate essentially. And when we see activity, so hydrolysis of the PLA or PBAT, we'll get a zone of clearing around a colony. And so I've just highlighted there with the red arrow, this zone of clearing, so call it a halo. So this is indicative of the degradation of the PLA or PBAT. And you'll see that not all colonies have these zones, which is expected. Not all microbes are breaking down the PLA or PBAT, but we get a nice spread of colonies doing some degradation. Next slide, please. So once we have these colonies that are looking active, we then pick that colony, inoculate in a growth media, and we get a cell culture after 18 hours or so. Once we've got the microbial cells, we'll centrifuge the cells to form a cell pellet. So it's just basically spinning down a tube. And I've got a photograph there showing the cell pellet. But it's the supernatant that's actually more important to us. So when you think about microbes in nature, they are degrading natural polymers like cellulose by secreting enzymes into the extracellular environment. So in this case, in our little tube, the cells are secreting enzymes into the supernatant. And those are the enzymes that are important. They're the ones that are breaking down the polymers into monomers so the cell can uptake them. So we take a sample of our supernatant, add it to our polymer emulsion, and it's the same as the LB agar, the agar assay. Basically, if there's any degradation, that emulsion, that solution will go clear. Next slide, please. So these are just some photographs of our PLA solution assays. So we've taken some colonies that are looking active, we'd added it to our emulsions, and we do some incubations at 37 degrees and 50 degrees. And I've highlighted in the yellow boxes where we've seen degradation after 18 hours. So for example, there was a colony isolate from the hot bin enrichment degrading the emulsion after 18 hours. So you can see it is quite clear. And then a teabag at 50 degrees, a colony from the teabag enrichment. Again, it was showing some degradation after 18 hours. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of the PBAT emulsion assays. Again, a colony from the Belfast compost and another one from the teabag enrichment, all showing some significant degradation after 18 hours. Next slide. So this visually all looks great, but we really need to understand the rate of degradation. So we can measure this going from opaque to clear using a spectrophotometer. So we're looking at optical density, and we can measure this and produce these nice looking graphs that show the degradation over time. So if you take the PBAT degradation at the top there, the colony from the teabag enrichment shows significant degradation over 22 hours. But then the PLA degradation, one of the colony isolates from the hot bin at 37 degrees, shows significant degradation after 4 hours. So this is really interesting. But at this point, we need to make sure that it's not just the disruption of the emulsion happening, rather we need to make sure that it's actually the polymer degrading. So this is where we use more advanced analysis. So using liquid chromatography, which will actually help us identify the products of degradation. So there's some chromatograms there just showing monomers that we're actually succeeding in breaking down the polymers. Next slide, please. And this is just an overview of the degradation activities we've identified so far from single colonies from the different enrichments. So, for example, the Belfast industrial compost, we're seeing colonies active on PLA and PBAT at both temperatures. The Belfast leachate, again, there's colonies acting on PLA and PBAT, but more so at 37 degrees. And then there's that spectacular bug in the hot bin that's doing something with PLA just after 4 hours at 37 degrees. And with the teabag compost, again, there's colonies acting on both polymers. So now that we have these cells, we're able to extract the DNA and send that DNA for sequencing, and we're able to identify those microbes and get more information on those. Next slide, please. So objectives for the next 6 months, it's just going to be a continuation of looking for these isolates from the enrichments and investigating biodegradation. As I mentioned there, we've got the cells so we can extract the DNA for sequencing. That's quite important that we have all that information. And then obviously we want to start looking at anaerobic digestion and start having conversations with anaerobic technology about that and see what we can do in the lab. And then ultimately, we need to actually know which enzymes are doing the jobs that's breaking down the polymers. So again, once we know the sequencing data, we're able to identify the enzymes that are secreted, and we can do some isolated enzyme assays. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Maria. That was Maria Bawn on the biochemistry experiments. And now I'm going to hand over to Danielle, who's going to talk about citizen science.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Maria. Hi, everyone. So that was quite a nice introduction to the sort of science in the lab that we have going on at the moment in the group. So now we're going to slightly switch gears to science at home, and I'm going to talk about our Big Compost Experiment citizen science project. So just to recap for anyone who's not taking part or has heard about this yet, it's a project that we launched back in November in 2019. And so far we've got over 18 months of data analysed, and we've got some really great recruitment happening. So we've got about 9,590 people who've taken part in our surveys, and about 1,585 people who have actually taken part in home compost experiments. So actually doing real life science at home in their own compost bins. And we've got around 1,126 results coming back from this, and the experiment is still very much ongoing. So hopefully what we'll introduce you to is the sort of results as they are so far, but obviously we'd like to kind of keep you updated as things progress over the following years. And for anyone who doesn't know, the website's just in the bottom left corner, so www.bigcompostexperiment.org.uk. So there's lots more information on there, and some instructions and guidelines about how to take part. So far, after 18 months of people testing compostable products in their own compost bins or hot bins around the UK, in summary, we've got around 68% of our item results, which are showing that the items are still visible. So we sort of have a level between 0 and 4, and 0 being where an item has disappeared, where an item is completely visible, and level 4 is where an item has completely disappeared in someone's compost. So 68% of our results are indicating that they're still visible in someone's home composting timeframes. We've also got highest number of results reported back for newspaper and magazine wraps, and of those 70% of them were still visible when someone wants to dig up and use their compost. And just roughly over the whole of the UK, there's actually very little variation at the moment in the results we're getting back. Also, according to composter types, there's sort of no magic bullet in terms of a composter or a compost strategy that's breaking these things down much better than any others. So basically this is indicating that there are some issues with breaking down these products across many different types of environment. And for those of you who have been at the receiving end of some of my emails over the last 18 months, you'll know that we started a teabag trial back in April of this year. And that's really a chance for us to understand a more sort of focused product type in more detail. So we wanted to start with tea bags, really. One, because they're sort of ubiquitous and a lot of people use them, and so a lot of tea bag material waste is therefore finding its way into disposal routes, including compost bins or council food waste. So tea bags are an important starting point, and so it's really great that Maria's just shown you the sort of science-based analysis of what we're doing on that front, and this is complementary to that. So we've had around 105 tea bag results back so far, and of them around 43% of those results are showing tea bag bits and bobs and bits of material still visible in people's compost. Another thing to highlight, and this is also through talking to lots of you via the email, that the majority of tea bag brands and manufacturers at the moment aren't displaying information about compostable certification, if indeed they have it at all. So this is something that we're also starting to engage with tea bag manufacturers and industry associations about what the role of that is for citizens, and why it might be quite important in the future that people can understand what a tea bag, for instance, is made out of, and therefore how to dispose of it properly. And so also another sort of high level summary from the results so far is that we had a look at what kind of certification markings are visible on the items that people were testing. So of them, as you might expect, like the most frequent certification mark that we see on the products being tested in the compost experiment is a TUV home compost certification marking. So we sort of had a look at the numbers there, and I think around 75% of those items that display this TUV home compost, so sort of indicating that they're suitable for home composting, 75% of them were still visible when someone wants to use their compost. So at the moment, this is sort of indicating that there is currently a bit of a disparity and an issue between the way that these materials are being certified in a lab and comparing that to how they actually perform in real life home composting situations. So next steps for this experiment. So we're very much ongoing, and if anyone drinks tea or uses tea bags, please do go onto the website and sign up and take part. We really need sort of more data on this as much as we can get, really. We're also going to continue to promote citizen science across the UK. We'll be starting some home compost sampling and lab testing, so watch this space. We'll be in touch with all of our participants about that in the coming months, and we'll also continue to engage with policymakers, the standards and certification bodies and manufacturers and citizens, of course, about what we're finding in the study as we progress. And if anyone wants to get in contact about any of this, because I know some of you may have questions as the study progresses, my email's in the bottom left corner.
Thanks, Danielle. And just to emphasize again, if you got questions, we will get to them at the end, and so just plug them into the Q&A button, and we'll have time at the end of all the presentations to address try and address as many questions as possible. But otherwise, obviously, Danielle is very good at replying to the Big Compost citizens, and so you can also email her. So thank you very much, Danielle. That's great work. Now we're going to hand over to Nutcha, who is doing a PhD on automatic sorting of compostable plastics. Nutcha.
Thank you, Mark and Danielle. I'm Nutcha. I'm first-year PhD student for Mechanical Engineering, UCL. I'm working on automatic compostable plastic sorting technologies. And this is the overview of my research. Imagine that rubbish consists of compostable plastic, recyclable plastic, and food waste. Just so you know that compostable plastic and recyclable plastic are really similar. Therefore, it's very difficult to classify by manual sorting. Therefore, I decided to use hyperspectral imaging technologies and machine learning combined together to classify this type of plastic. Therefore, the output of the system is recyclable, compostable, and food waste. Next slide. I will explain more about hyperspectral imaging technology. It is combining between spectrals and imaging technology to identify the materials. Each pixel will contain the spectral information. It's called hypercube. After that, we analyze hypercube, recognize the pattern by machine learning, and then we will know the type of materials. And this picture is the hyperspectral imaging components. The first one is hyperspectral camera. This one is for image acquisitions. Halogen lamp is light source. Conveyor belt is used for moving the sample. Reference panel is used to ensure that the brightness from all directions are the same. And the software is embedded the machine learning algorithms to recognize the pattern of the wave. Next slide, please. This one is the experiments overview of my first experiments. I use hyperspectral imaging and machine learning algorithms to develop the model to classify PLA and teabag that we know is compostable plastic from recyclable plastic, PET, PP, PS, and PE, and also measuring the accuracy of the system. In these experiments, the independent variables are thickness, size of sample, surface contaminations, and color. After I adjust the independent variables, I build the model using machine learning, and then I measure the dependent variables, which are shape of reflection curve and percentage of separation. If the percentage of separation are not too high, I will reconstruct the model again and retest until it reaches the acceptable level. Next slide, please. For timeline and future work, this month I setting up the experiment, installing the analysis software. Next month, I will executing first experiments, developing model to classify compostable plastic and recyclable plastic. From that to Feb next year, I will analyzing and interpreting the results, improving my model, retesting to improve the accuracy level. From March next year, I will move to phase 2. I will develop the new model to detect compostable plastic when it commingle with food waste and also recyclable plastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nutcha. That's great work. And yeah, that's just to emphasize that. I mean, one of the ways in which we believe compostable plastics are going to leave the domestic residences is possibly through the food waste separation that is going to be across the whole of the UK by 2023. And so Nutcha needs to be able to, well, the technique we're hoping will be able to take the input of food waste, which would be commingled with compostable plastics, and be able to ratify whether they are suitable for the process by which the food waste is going to be composted, either an industrial composting process or an anaerobic digestion process, and suitably be able to sort them. So that's why it's so important to get the sorting technology to work in a food waste scenario. Now I'd like to hand over to Charnett.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself for a sec. Hi everyone, so I'm Charnett. So before I go into what we've done in the past few months, I'll give a little reminder on what the overall aims of the LCA work is. So as a whole, we want to be able to use life cycle assessment to advise on how compostable can integrate into our society. And with this, what we overall as an aim to do is to run a series of workshops with various stakeholders and have meetings with very key partners to develop a methodology into analysing compostable plastics, and then develop how we can use and discuss on how we can use the results to build advice for these products as well. So one of the things that we've done is that we ran a first workshop for LCA, and that workshop was to assess what are the requirements or what are the questions that needs to be answered using life cycle assessment. As you can see, there's a range of contributors to this workshop, and as a whole, there's a consensus on that we need an LCA framework on compostable plastic to provide an evidence base for policy and local authority for decision making. We also agreed that we need to carry out a series of LCAs on different products to capture all the different goals and scope, and to again advise on or put guidance into this LCA framework on how we should carry out life cycle assessment in the future. Another key thing is to ensure that we capture the indirect effects of compostable plastics. So whether or not, how does compostable affect, say, food waste or increasing food waste, or how does it affect when it turns into compost? How do we credit this? So as part of this project, we'll be doing a lot of methodology development as well. Next slide, please. So, so since the workshop, we've had meetings set up with various partners, so including Vegware and Novamont, and we discuss how we can build connections with the suppliers and the waste processors to see what kind of data we need to carry out a comprehensive life cycle assessment. We also agreed that we need to develop ways on creating or evaluating the effect of compost on the environment as well. So specifically with Vegware, we have already outlined 3 levels of scenarios that we're looking at. So there's different closed loop system that we want to look at with Vegware products. So one of them is the small closed loop system where a small business buys Vegware product and then First Mile collects it for disposal. And then a bigger closed loop system involves paper round collecting commercial waste from commercial Vegware waste, and then transferring them to ENVA for IVC or for composting. And then the larger closed loop system is where Vegware products is commingled with food waste, commercial food waste, and then processed via anaerobic digestion in the Derby area. And in the next few months, we will try and connect further with other key partners to form agreement how we can collaborate and develop more scenarios for which we can analyze and do each product-led case studies as well. We also need to meet DEFRA on how we can further discuss on what is necessary for in the future for like testing or labeling requirement for compostables, and see how life cycle assessment can assist with this as well. So yeah, and that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Charnett. And that's, yeah, just to emphasize that research is so fundamental, really, because it addresses the issue of which, in the end, which products really make sense. And to say a product is probably the wrong thing to say. It's a system of the product being made, developed, the service, and then the collection and the composting. And so that's why we recognize that we have to both study, let's say, food takeaway packaging as one type of application, all the way through to things like tea bags, which are sort of everyday use and end up in everyone's home. And then maybe more specialized things like nappies, where you know, it's a very, very challenging application, but nevertheless there is a huge amount of waste produced in that sector, and the fact is that most of it goes to landfill at the moment, which is not ideal. So can there be a better way forward? Okay, so now we're going to talk about the behavior change issues. So Aisha, who is doing a PhD on this, has been studying this. Unfortunately, she has been called away for personal reasons, so I'm going to just talk you through her latest research. So as I was saying, one of the key ways out of the home and also in other applications will be to commingle the compostable plastic with food waste. And we wanted to find out more about people's attitude towards food waste collection, to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. So we did this Aisha did this carrying out an online survey, and the primary aim was to work out what were the ways in which were the barriers and opportunities and motivations and people's capabilities in separating food waste in the home and recycling it. And the secondary aim was to work out, related to that, what's the role of compostable caddy liners? Do they enhance, or are they, do they in any way change people's attitudes and motivations or capabilities? And one of the reasons to carry this out is because, is one of the major aims of this government is to have nationwide food separation and collection by 2023, which is going to have a huge environmental benefit to the country, and this is going to require quite a large behaviour change from many people, especially in England, who have never done this before. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just some summary of the results so far. So 1,801 participants completed the survey across a range of different demographics, but the average mean age was 67. It was 65% female, 92% white or white British, and 42% retired. Many people in this survey owned their own homes, and about 50% had food waste collection services. It is significant, I think, that 73% of them nevertheless had not heard that it's a major ambition for this government to roll out food waste collection across the whole nation. But positively, there was a lot of enthusiasm for it. 85% felt ready for this change. And of those who already were offered food waste collection, which is 944 of the survey, so roughly 50%, 86% were recycling their food waste via food council collection services. And I think that implies, although I have to check, what that means that the other 15% were either not recycling it or were using home compost. And of the ones who were using a food waste collection, 69% were using compostable caddy liners. Next slide. Yeah. So and then what Aisha did is have some qualitative questions for those survey participants to ask them the reasons why they did or didn't recycle food waste and the opportunities and motivations for doing it. And so just a brief summary of some of those here. The reasons for not recycling food waste were things, well, fear of pests and hygiene within the environment of the home and outside the home. Cost, both in terms of their time and their financial costs. They were recycling food in other ways, so home composting, or they felt they didn't have reliable collection of food waste. Or they didn't have a space to put an extra bin to separately collect food waste. I don't think any of those are, there have been other studies like this in the past, and I think that kind of chimes with those. People not feeling ready for the nationwide collection of food waste. Well, this sort of, there does seem to be low awareness of this, but hopefully they'll build up over the next year. Of course, people are, one of the things that keeps coming up is people just they find it a bit disgusting. And that sort of revolves around sort of pests and and smells and things. And the reasons for not using compostable caddy liners were either they were repurposing other materials, or they didn't think a caddy liner was necessary, or they were asked to pay for it themselves and they found that there was a cost issue. Or they had beliefs about the impact of those caddy liners and didn't want to use them for that reason. Or they didn't think they were effective enough, so design-related factors. Okay, so there's quite a lot of data there, and we will be publishing a paper on this in the next few months. So for those of you interested in the kind of nitty-gritty detail, that data will be published and will be available to you all. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just a little bit of a summary of the so-called COM-B factors, which is this model for behavior change, which is that in order to get a behavior change in a person, they need to be capable of the behavior change, they need to have the opportunity to carry out that behavior change, and they need to be motivated. And all three of those have to be aligned in order for that behavior to happen, that behavior change to happen. And in the case of food waste collection, with this survey, it seemed that that motivation and psychological capability, either wanting to do it and seeing the reason for doing it, I mean, this really is the fact that otherwise food waste tends to go into landfill and produce methane, which most of it's not collected, and so that awareness is positive. People want to do the right thing. There are some demographic factors associated with recycling food waste, and I was surprised to find that education negatively predicts people's willingness to do food waste recycling, which is slightly depressing, but or maybe it's good. I don't know. Anyway, more to come on this. So yes, Aisha sends her apologies, but that's a summary of the work she's done so far. So now I will hand over to Danielle again, who has been doing work with Aisha actually on labeling and design of compostable packaging. Danielle.
Great, thank you, Mark. So yeah, just to summarize the work that Aisha and I have been developing about labeling of compostable packaging and behaviour, we held a workshop earlier this year and with invited stakeholders, and we discussed some of the issues around compostable product labelling and how a labelling system for compostable products needs to how it needs to act for industry, for policy and citizens. So there were sort of several different, I guess, needs from different areas of industry and policy and people for labels. So labels themselves, I think, are an interesting kind of quite a complex study, even though they might be sort of a tiny part of a piece of product packaging labeling. So really we wanted to look at how we can inform the design of a study, which we'll carry out this year, into citizen disposal behaviours in relation to compostable product labelling design. And by labelling design, I mean the words in the images that you use to create a label. So the highlights from the meeting were that there was general consensus from our consortia that we should include the wrap packaging formats focus. So if anyone hasn't seen it, there's a really great guide that released in 2019 called Considerations for Compostable Packaging. And in it, there is lots of interesting evidence around why certain kinds of product packaging types make sense for kind of food waste collection. And those include things like food caddy liners, tea bags, coffee pods, fruit and vegetable stickers, and certain kinds of takeaway packaging. So in terms of the type of products that we'll be testing labelling on, these are the ranges of products that we'll choose to use in the study. The labelling design variables, we discussed this in great detail, and I think that there is consensus that we need to test how different messaging is understood by citizens. So there is some disagreement about how people understand the word compost as opposed to the word recycle, and would that have a bearing on someone's understanding of a label if it was put as part of a compostable packaging labelling system. And the other sort of main aims of the meeting was to discuss how do we start kind of deciding on the logo systems or the type of logo that we might use to test this sort of labelling design. And so we came up with a selection of labelling systems. One is the OPRL. You might have heard of it on pack recycling logo scheme. It's on loads of packaging that you might buy from the supermarket. The European Bioplastics seedling logo, that's a logo that's used in conjunction with EN 13432 compostability testing in Europe. And REAL, the REAL scheme, which is actually a new certification scheme being developed now to communicate home compostability and industrial compostability for the UK. So they're sort of the three main logo types that our industry partners felt were the most useful to test what wording and how people understand the wording in conjunction with the logo system. In general, our research methodology, we discussed this, and because of current uncertainty around pandemic effects, I think that we're going to sort of be cautious about this and propose a web-based survey study. So not dissimilar to Aisha's food waste web survey that Mark just showed you before. So yeah, in summary, the background to this research, there are some crossovers with Aisha's food waste study work. So we're mindful of the 2023 UK mandatory food waste collection, and therefore kind of the impacts this might have on the way that people use and dispose of products. There's also in the background, there's also big changes coming in terms of the UK Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme, and that's also going to be updated. So a revised scheme is going to be working from 2023, and this will include a question of product labelling and what the labelling, how you can sort of apply to have a label on your product as part of the scheme. So a labelling system is going to be really important as part of the governance of that scheme in the future. So to summarise, these were the three main existing logo schemes: the OPRL, the European Bioplastics, and the Real logo. And so what I've done here is we've actually just adapted them to try and suggest a set of kind of visual label sort of test parameters, if you will, in order for people to understand and sort of tell us how well they understand the function of the label. So you can see broadly it's an image and it's also a word. And we're also going to be testing in a sort of quite straightforward way. Do the people understand the word compost as opposed to the word recycling, and does that lead them to different disposal behaviours? And so that's just a sort of brief overview of the kind of matrix of variables that we'll be looking to test. In addition to this, we'll also be testing them over the range of product categories that I spoke about before, so takeaway packaging, fruit and veg stickers, etc. So yeah, the next steps for this really is this winter, we're going to be targeting launching the survey, and then we'll carry out the survey itself over the following months. We really want to try and get a wide demographic participation in this. So we'll very kindly, our industry partners are going to be able to sort of push out some of these surveys through their networks, local authorities, waste collection services, etc. And also targeting a sort of results reporting date in the summer next year. So again, watch this space for the results from the study.
Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, just to sort of emphasize that the kind of labeling world is obviously is quite complicated. There's lots of different actors out there doing different things, and yet at the same time it seems that most people don't understand almost any of the labels with regard to this topic, the ordinary citizen in the street, let's say. So it's definitely our ambition to see if we can make some progress there, because it seems like that's really absolutely key. All the other stuff, it really relies on people putting it in the right bin, and if they don't understand that, then we're going to have all sorts of contamination. So labeling absolutely key. So great work, Danielle, thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Jenny, who's leading our public policy work. Jenny Bird.
Thanks, Mark, and hi everyone. I'm just going to talk very quickly about the policy theme of work. So my colleague Rita Pino and I are working in this area, and our job really is to try and connect up all of the different strands of research that you've just been hearing about with policymakers in the UK. So what we've been doing up until now is a lot of sort of networking and building those connections. So we've been talking to people in the UK government, in the Environment Agency, and in Parliament as well. And we've been trying to integrate those stakeholders into some of the research themes that you've just been hearing about, particularly on the labelling work and the life cycle assessment work. And we've also been trying to feed in the findings from the research so far into various government consultations that have been happening over the last few months. So they include DEFRA has run a couple of consultations in this area, and in the House of Commons, also an inquiry on plastic waste that they've contributed to. So next slide, please. And so that's what we've been doing until now. Looking forward, the sort of immediate thing that we're planning to do is continue working on the LCA side and exploring that a bit more with DEFRA and the Environment Agency to think about how that work can be used in some of the assessments they're doing. And we're also just starting to think about plans now for the new year for some policy workshops. It's very embryonic at this stage, so watch the space, and I hope to have more to say on that next time we meet. So that's it from me. Thanks. I'll hand back to Mark.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so that, I mean, that's just as kind of a brief, a whistle-stop tour through the research project from many different disciplines and different approaches. As you can see, there's a lot going on. We sort of started in earnest at the beginning of this year and ramped up, and we were sort of up and running with everyone on the team by March. And so this last 6 months has really been allowed us to sort of really get going, interact with all our partners and with the policy partners as well, and get everyone in the meetings together, which has been absolutely vital. And also get into the lab. The lab's been held up, of course, by COVID restrictions, but Maria and John and Helen, who are also on this call, have overcome so many hurdles to get all that up and running. And Nutcha, as you can hear, is gearing up her lab work soon. Yeah, Charnett and Danielle and Aisha have all been going full throttle on all the different aspects. So hopefully we've been meeting a lot of you anyway, and with the Big Compost Experiment, we've been communicating our results through email and through the surveys. So hopefully you feel informed about what is happening and what our research is. We'd like to now sort of shift gear and hand over to you in a way, and sort of answer some of your questions. And I'm just going to hand over to Beth, our research manager, who is going to sort of MC the questions and pose them from the list to the panel. Beth.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Mark. Great. Yes. So we've got some great questions. Thanks very much for your contributions, your comments, and your questions. I think the best thing to do here is I'm going to go in reverse order so we can be familiar with what we just talked about, and then we'll work our way back up. If you have additional questions, just pop them in the Q&A, and hopefully we'll have time to get to them. We've got about half an hour. So, okay, so I'm going to start with Christine's question, which is quite an interesting and relevant question. So Christine asked, the sample for the food waste study was massively skewed towards older white homeowners, so the reviews and behaviors are unlikely to be representative of the population as a whole. These self-selecting surveys are almost always unrepresentative. To really understand how people are behaving and will behave, you need to redo the survey with a properly representative sample. Can you do this? So I don't know whether Mark or Danielle, you want to talk to this one. This is a really good question. Mark, sorry, you're on mute, Mark.
It's a really good question, and of course these things. We did try our best, not to get a skewed sample, and so we haven't. It's not just, we have been using many different ways of communicating with citizens, and so far, as you can see, we haven't succeeded. So it's not for want of trying. So it's our ambition to continue to do this. We are hoping to kind of connect with different sections of society in different ways. Aisha knows more. She's not here on the call, but we're doing that in many different ways. So I can't really. I can only assure you that we are going to try and do this, obviously. And the important thing is to try whatever data that we report, the stats for that cohort. So to give you an example, the waste processors that we're working with have been sending it out to their citizens through their networks. And we've also been putting it through a commercial engine which is a consumer questionnaire which pays people to answer questions. So it's not that we haven't really been trying many different ways to try and get a much better representation of the citizens. It's just really hard to do so.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And sort of on a similar tack, Paula asks, really interesting work, thanks for sharing. With the consumer-focused research, did participants shed light on their attitudes and beliefs about littering and disgrading in nature of compostable packaging? So I don't know, Danielle, if we have any data on that.
Hi. So I suppose I can talk about the work in terms of the Big Compost Experiment, and that's the behavioural questions in that study are really focused around people's purchasing and decisions around compostable packaging purchasing. So if you want to look at the full range of results from the Big Compost Experiment, there's a report section on our website. So it's all in there. You can read the kind of latest survey analysis from 18 months data. So in that, roughly off the top of my head, we had a kind of large majority are really in favour of buying compostable biodegradable packaging. And Aisha's actually released a paper which I think is featured on the Plastic Waste Hub website. She's written a paper around this particular question, which is more of a study around people's motivations and the barriers and opportunities around buying compostable materials. So if that's of interest, I'll just reroute you to the Plastic Waste Hub news feed as well. But in terms of the study that Aisha's discussed, I can't talk about that. I don't know, Mark, if you have any more insight onto Aisha's study, because she's not here.
Sorry, what was the question there?
So I think, was it Paula had a question about people's attitudes around littering or disposing of compostable plastics? I'm not sure if there's anything we can add to that.
With regard to littering, yeah, off the top of my head, I don't recall that coming up at all. It was mostly around people being persuaded to buy products that had compostable packaging or not, like were they positive towards it or not. And then whether they understood where to put it or not. And I don't remember there being many people saying, I just put it into the environment and litter it, you know, who took part in that survey. But of course, that doesn't mean that people don't think that. But I don't think we have much data on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, right. The questions are coming in thick and fast here, which is great. I really like your enthusiasm. I'm going to try to keep up as best I can here. So just on that sort of accessibility and functionality of the systems, I'm just going to read Neil's comment and question. I assume everyone familiar with food waste collection systems. I assume everyone's familiar with food waste collection systems in Milan. Free compostable bin liners, frequent collections, multilingual communications, 5-language, I think, very low contamination rates and high take up. I don't know whether Mark or maybe somebody from policy wants to just talk about that briefly. I think, Mark, we know, we've heard about the Italian system, and the Italian system is the envy, I think, of a lot of people in the UK.
Yeah, and we're working with the BBIA who've been giving us real insight into that, because various members of the BBI set up that system. So yeah, we're across that, and of course, different countries, you have different cultures, and I think I'm writing that in the Italian system, it is much more of a you get penalised if you don't get it right, and I think in the UK, moving people towards such a system certainly it doesn't seem to be what the government are proposing to do at the moment. And so it's more of a question of what system would work in the UK, given the constraints of what local authorities are tasked to do, what companies want to do in terms of their environmental credentials, and what's good for the environment. So it's certainly insightful, the Italian system, and it's definitely shows it can be done, especially with compostable liners that seem, so the evidence that they work is obviously there, and we are working with companies who produce those compostable liners to do the LCA on those.
And Mark, I'm going to do a follow-up question from Alan, who says, Mark says food waste collection will be mandatory from 2023. Mandatory on whom? Councils or citizens? Our waste disposal people ceased allowing us to put food waste in the garden waste bin recently and currently offer no alternative. Also, the garden waste collection is an option requiring a fee to be paid. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm right, but Jenny can, or Rita can correct me, that it's going to be law in the environmental bill that every local authority has to collect food waste from all households. So they have to offer households a food waste collection. That's right, isn't it, Jenny?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I'm going to change tack a little bit and talk about some more science-based things. In the chat, Oliver made a comment early on saying, I'm launching a lobbying campaign with a target of creating biodegradable plastics from oil. I have a petition which is already launched locally. It has positive following, 400 petitioners who attended our recent 4-day vintage festival. So Oliver asks, can any scientists involved in this group help in terms of the research regarding biodegradable plastics from oil?
I'm happy to say something. Maybe John might want to jump in, or maybe Maria. But thanks, Oliver. I think that's an interesting question. I guess one of my questions is are you thinking are you interested in making it from waste oil or from crude oil type materials, which obviously would be a bit counterproductive? And I'm guessing it's probably the former. I think absolutely we could have a conversation about this, and we do have some experience of making some compostable compostable plastics from oil-based waste oil type materials. And these are biodegradable plastics that are made in biological systems. So I think absolutely we could have a conversation about this. John, did you want to add anything more?
I was just going to ask, is it waste food oil like cooking oil, or is it virgin crude oil from petrochemicals? I mean, there's
so Oliver's written in the chat crude oil.
Crude oil. Oh. Well, I mean, crude oil is currently used to make all kinds of plastics, monomers. I mean, that's the basis of all of the plastics industry. And it's only recently that biodegradable plastics are being made. The majority of the biodegradable plastics, though, come from bio-derived materials.
Yes.
So I think we need to have a chat about what you're intending to do or propose. And maybe there are reasons why you want to do that, or maybe there are other things that we might talk about or suggest. So I don't know how to get people in contact with us afterwards, Mark or Danielle.
They can email the general email, which is the Plastic Waste Hub email address, which I think is available.
Put that up here now. There you go.
Thanks.
It's not the end, but there you go just for information.
Okay, I mean, it would be cool to chat just to understand a little bit more about what you're planning to propose.
Great, thanks. So our first question on the Q&A was for Maria, and I think she sort of answered this with one of our slides, but Maria, maybe if you could just give a little bit more detail about this, that would be great. The question is from Bob. Hi Maria, anaerobic digestion is a major process for bio-waste treatment in the UK. Are you looking at anaerobic processes as well as aerobic?
Yeah, so that's part of our plan in the next 6 months to actually explore what we can do. So yeah, we're going to start conversations with anaerobic technologies who do anaerobic digestion, and yeah, just to see what we can do on a lab scale. So it'll be definitely all new experiments for us, but yeah, quite significant, especially with how important these anaerobic digesters are and how often they are used. So yeah, watch this space.
Thanks, Maria. And on a point about composition, Roger asks, apologies, Roger, when a magazine wrapper states it's made from potato starch, do we know if it's made from waste from the potato industry or from edible food crops? This seems to me to be an important distinction. I'm not sure whether Helen or Mark or John, one of you wants to, if you know more about this.
No, I don't know, and it would be good to go to a factory to find out exactly how they make this. I don't know whether anybody else here knows, or whether it's certain parts of the waste potatoes that then don't make the grade into food grade materials.
I mean, my guess might be it is food-based starch, because if you think about the peelings, they've got quite a lot of phenolics in, which wouldn't be a good idea to put into wrappers. But as John says, this would have to be something that you know, we would find out a little bit more about.
Okay, Helen asks, I saw a TV program that opaque plastics can't be recycled because the machines can't read them. They can't tell what type of plastic they are. Is this true? So Mark and maybe Nutcha, can you speak to this a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, normally nowadays in the marketing, sure, we can classify black plastic because they use NIR machine, and it's based on the reflectance curve. So if you use the black plastic, it means that all light are absorbed. It's no reflectance curve. By the way, there is new technologies that not use NIR, they use MIR. So now it is in developing. However, my project use hyperspectrals. It means that it's combined image and NIR together. I can classify the black plastic because I classify based on image. Yes, it might overcome limitations in next 2 years, might be. Thank you.
I think, did they also say transparent plastic or black plastic in that question?
Opaque.
Black plastic.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the NIR reflection.
Yeah, I cannot right now.
But I think there's also Nutcha hasn't mentioned that she's also been using AI, artificial intelligence, and that's coming in more and more to these plastic recycling plants, and being very effective in being able to kind of successfully automatically sort plastics at very high speeds. So as the market for recycling plastic goes higher, and it becomes it will be an income loss for the waste processing firms not to detect these, then they will put more and more effort into doing it. So it's not so much a technical problem as a kind of investment in the right kit to then for them to sort that stuff at the plant.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Right, one for Danielle from Sam. This is a long question, so just bear with me. You mentioned that 75% of items displaying TUV home remain still visible. Can you explain how the test conditions are being validated? For instance, does the participant also report on the composting of food waste, showing that fruit peel compost in an acceptable time frame? Are the participants testing in parallel with the items or reference material? Just trying to understand if and how you check whether each participant is properly home composting.
Great question. So I guess we have to go back to the kind of nature of citizen science as a sort of, the project itself is set up to allow people to take part at home with things that they have in and around their home, so their compost bins and their waste. Our sort of mechanisms to check what people are doing are limited because of that, because we're not actually there with them checking their processes and their data. So we can rely on the data that they share as a sort of numerative, the quantitative data that they upload, but also participants are given the option of uploading images of the items that they test before they put them in, the compost bin, so evidence of what the compost bin is like. So from that we can see roughly what sort of state the compost bin compost is in, and we can also see images of the finished articles that they find, if they find anything at all, and they can submit those photos. But that's sort of the limitation of citizen science and the way that the project is run is that we're sort of using data that's provided to us by citizens. It's not something that we can sort of go into any more detail in that current setup. However, we're I mentioned it earlier in the presentation that we're planning on starting or initiating some home composting testing. So the group, so Maria and Helen and John and I and Mark will be organising to send out some test sampling kits so that we can actually get some physical samples of people's compost, but also any of the items that they're sort of, the item remains that they find, we can also bring them back to the labs and test them in a more controlled environment. So yeah, in terms of those are the kind of broad limitations of citizen science, but we're hoping that we'll overcome any of those sort of questions through doing additional lab testing that will complement the study.
Thanks, Danielle. And just a follow-up question, I guess, for maybe for Mark, have you tried involving a local council in this kind of survey?
Yeah, well, so we have local authorities as part of the consortium, and we have been asking all our partners to help us with the surveys. So the answer is yes. Yeah, but so the data we have is the best we've got so far by reaching out to all of our consortium members. If anyone has on this call access to ways to contact citizens and get them to engage, which, you know, from different demographics and different types of people, that we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and on that point, Neil has actually said, would it help to target student populations for case studies, multicultural, often transient and rented accommodation, prone to using fast food and convenience foods? Crack that group, and you're a long way there. Okay, a question about standardization and testing. An anonymous participant asks, any future plans to test packaging and bioplastic performance in landfills in line with an American standard, the ASTM D5526? How accurate is that test? I don't know whether you know about this, Mark, or.
Is this what, sorry, was this mentioned at one of our LCA meetings? I'm just thinking, Charnett, where there was a data set, people were talking about the performance.
So the I think it's the OWS organic waste database from the US that will talk about different waste in different settings. So so there are some data in terms of how different types of material will perform in different waste, like in different waste processing. So yeah, that is the WS system, I believe. But I don't think as a hub we are going to test the how they will degrade in landfill.
Yeah, exactly. It's not part of our, because we basically, it's a failure if it ends up in landfill, essentially, compostable packaging, and so it hasn't really been part of our objectives.
Okay, sorry, I got distracted Googling the the test code. Just give me 1 second, please. And another anonymous attendee asks, what role does the built environment play in food waste collection? I live in an area where there isn't a lot of room for bins, which already makes rubbish collection difficult and messy, which is sort of actually tagging on to that comment about the student accommodation, right? And yeah.
I think this is something that when we talked to some of our waste collection partners early on, we realized that, you know, in cities, there's many different factors that get involved here. One is in cities, people have less space, and as this questioner sort of alludes to, that's tricky. But also getting in and out of blocks of flats for the waste processor collectors, it's difficult. And how often do you collect them when you have food waste collections? Is once a week enough? And even that might be very expensive. So it'd be really interesting to see how they tackle that in high density areas. obviously Wales and Scotland have already kind of overcome these issues. And so, I mean, I'm not appraised at how they had to go it, but I have seen it in Italy and France. They have collections on the street or in communal areas where the citizens put their food waste into a much bigger container that's not too far from the entrance to their flat. But we're not involved in that research, how they're gonna solve that problem. But I think, you know, worldwide there are ways to solve it. It's just, I guess usually it's an economic problem, really, isn't it? It's how much money you want to invest in getting how much food waste from high density housing.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of comments just about the fact that Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland already have a national food waste collection system in place. Whether or not we can access data, whether we can separate that data out in our citizen science. I don't know whether that's possible or whether we have the scope to do that, but.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, these questions about how different organizations are going to do it is not really part of the scope of this research. It's really about whether, if you collect compostable packaging through food waste, can it be composted is a major question for us. And so, or does it need to be collected separately? And if so, how would it be collected separately? And I guess that's when Nutcha's work comes in. If it was collected via dry recycling, could it be accurately sorted, automatically sorted?
So a couple more questions, early questions that we had on the home composting. Hi, Danielle, from Bob. Hi, Danielle, can you tell us the brands that degrade in the home compost, i.e. the 57% of tea bags that reached level 4?
So we have, again, going back to sort of the limitations of the data that we have is the data that people have submitted, and because it's a citizen science project, we have to sort of ask people to submit data. We can't sort of make them in order to take part, and I think this is a sort of key area of the project, which we'll try to kind of analyze the data that we have. So within the teabag results that we have, there's visual analysis and some numeric analysis that we can do from what we have, but we won't necessarily be able to identify all the tea bags. So if there's this sort of specific question around that, I've been very happy to kind of respond to queries around certain types of analysis or certain questions of the data. If you have a particular question that you would like to sort of see more information on or more analysis of, please do get in touch, send me an email, or send an email to hello@plastic waste hub, and we can try and tweak the next round of analysis to sort of answer your questions. I hope that answers it.
And Danielle, Chris asked, do we know what folks are doing when they come to use their compost, but it's still it's full of uncomposted plastic? So do they, he says, having to sieve everything out was the main reason I gave up on composting plastic in my garden.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. So over the last year and a half, we've had people that have been through all stages of the experiment and have sort of popped out the other side. And there's some of them are faced with this kind of question of, I've got a whole bunch of undegraded wrappers and bits in my compost, and how do I feel about that? And I think we haven't got any official data on people's kind of, I suppose, like the after effects of taking part in the study yet, but I think this is something we'd probably want to do as we wind on further towards the end of the study. But I think this question of, has it affected people's, I suppose, trust in those products and in those materials? I think it's an interesting one, and anecdotally, I think it possibly does. People don't want to put them back in if they've got to pick out loads of bits of tea bag or wrapper. So yeah, I think that there is a sort of important impact to register there, that if something is visibly detectable in their compost, it's slightly unsettling for some people. Not everyone. We have some people who've taken part who are very pro compostable plastics and are more than happy to kind of put them around 2 times, 3 times through their composting processes. And they're quite happy to do that, but it sort of seems to come down to personal choice in the end.
Hugo's just asked, do you have a sense of what should be the ideal biodegradation time for home composting? 20 days, 100 days, 2 years? EN 13432 requires the compostable plastics to disintegrate after 12 weeks and completely biodegrade after 6 months. Is this an ambitious target or should it be challenged?
Yeah, I can try and answer this. So I think so the industrial composting certification schemes rely on the kind of base EN 13432 lab testing processes. Any of the kind of adopted home composting schemes, so things like the TUV Home or the DIN Circo, if I'm saying it right, they're using an adapted form of that standard, and usually it comprises longer timeframes and testing in cooler environments to try and kind of further represent or more carefully represent what might happen at home in a home compost bin. I think what we're sort of finding now, and what the general analysis is sort of starting to show, that even the materials that are tested to this, for example, TUV Home, so that's within a 12-month time frame and a much cooler temperature. I can't remember the exact temperature off the top of my head, but that things are still not, in general, breaking down within those timeframes in a range of home composters. So I think there's a really strong indication there that the certification and lab testing has to be revisited, especially if the kind of the route of disposing of compostables through your home composting processes, if that's desired and that's endorsed by countries, by authorities, then I think that system of testing needs to reflect a wider, more variable set of environments. Yeah, I think it definitely needs revisiting.
Danielle. Okay, Mark, here's one for you. From Anonymous, I'm involved with a local coffee shop who has been debating whether to offer compostable coffee cups. There isn't the waste infrastructure to support widespread composting, and the compostable cups are higher carbon to produce than the traditional coffee cups. What should they do? Buy offer compostable cups to help signal the market, or go for the low carbon option?
Yeah, well, that's the dilemma of every compostable packaging manufacturer, and yeah, anyone who's thinking about any of these takeaway items. So I guess the answer is we hope to have that answer by the end of this project, and I know that's not a very good answer, but we are doing the work to try and the different bits of work to try and get at the problem. But I think Charnett's work on the LCA of that is going to be the most important here, which you state that it's higher carbon, but actually it's not clear to us that there has been very good calculations of that yet. And comparing like with like, the full environmental impact it seems to us that there hasn't, the jury is out, and we want to contribute to that debate by doing some proper calculations and doing the methodology. And Charnett probably wants to say a bit about that, or maybe not.
I see Charnett was typing an answer to another question.
Okay, don't worry.
I was going to ask her. But
yeah. No, okay. No, sorry. So essentially, yeah. The other thing to bear in mind here is that I think there are lots of behaviour changes that could come into play here. One is that reuse is much better than any of these, right? And encouraging people to reuse, i.e., to drink coffee on the premises, or to have some sort of reuse model is almost certainly better than any of the other ones. And so it isn't just which disposable that I think should be considered here. And then if you were to decide that people, in terms of, because it's, you're talking about people's businesses, their livelihood, it's all very well for us to say, oh no, you shouldn't use that, it's not good for the environment. But these small coffee shops often are competing against big brands, and they might feel they have to have a disposable cup that is cheap enough that they can make money. I don't want to guilt them out of doing that. But then I think what is often lacking is the fact that the high-end disposable cups that are commonly used out there are very high quality paper and very high quality liner, and they are recyclable. It's just the reason they don't get recycled is because they don't get collected in enough quantities. And so, if you can provide a place where people can where you can collect them and they can get recycled, it's another option. So I think this business about people just putting them into any bin, that's disaster. They're going to get incinerated or they'll be landfilled. So I think that's what you. It's difficult to say what you should do, but I think if you use conventional takeaway cups, then you should spend a lot of time and effort communicating to the customer that you want to recycle them and you should provide a place for them to recycle and then you should check they do get recycled. Or you should give them incentives for reuse, and that would be better. And if you're going to give compostable cups, then you've got to communicate to the customer how they can compost them and is it available. So I think at the moment, before we have the energy and the carbon costs calculated, which we haven't, there are 3 options, and I think communicating with the customer honestly about the fact that the jury's out, but that you are putting in place best practice for each of those types is the best way forward for the moment.
Thanks, Mark. I think we've got time for one more here. Apologies to the questions that we didn't get to. Again, if you'd like to continue a dialogue with us, just send us an email at hello@plasticwastehub to that mailbox. So the last question I'm going to pose, I don't know whether Jenny and Rita can comment on this, but as part of the 2023 changes, will rules re household waste be standardized across the country? As I understand it, there are currently a number of different ways of dealing with waste that local authorities use. If we had a nationwide system for all waste, not just food waste, the comms around this would be much simpler. I don't know whether Jenny and Rita have any info on this, and then maybe Mark, you can comment and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I can take that. Yes, there are plans to standardise across England which items all councils should expect to collect in their recycling services. So that's, I think, currently going through Parliament at the moment, actually. So that is something that is planned to come in soon.
I mean, yeah, all I would say is it feels to me like we've gone from a situation of it being sort of chaos, roughly, and very few things being actually have a market for them. So that although they were separated for recycling, they didn't have a very good market to now we're sort of ramping up with the plastic pack targets being very clearly set, and WRAP working with lots of the big supermarkets and other retailers. We are seeing, even if customers are not seeing it too clearly, behind the scenes, we're seeing rapid change at the way these big users of plastic packaging are changing the type of polymers used and also the avenues to recycling them, and a convergence towards, well, 3 big polymers: polyethylene, polypropylene, and PET. And so there is lots of change happening, but it doesn't seem it doesn't seem like there's much progress. But I do think that the UK is actually going in the right direction and making progress, maybe not as quickly as it could. In fact, definitely not as quickly as it could. But the ship is moving in the right direction for a simpler system. And the compostables question that we're asking is one which it requires science to get to the right answer, because the other bits, it's more economic incentives and systems that need to be put in place, and government needs to be clear about policies and taxes and so on, and that seems to be happening. But with the compostables, we just don't know yet actually lots of the answers. So that's why we're doing the research on compostables, because they're a significant sector of the market that needs to be resolved. There are particular things that we think they will be good at that other plastics and paper products will not maybe be as good, but we need to get the evidence, and that's the aim of this research. So I think that's it. Is it, Beth? Are we out of time?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're out of time. My apologies to everybody's questions we didn't get to, and some of you have lovely comments, and there are nice links in the Q&A as well. We've recorded this session, so we should be able to make it available for those. Yeah, Danielle, do you want to?
I'll just add as well. So any questions that we have in the Q&A box, we will sort of share them amongst the group, and we'll try and answer them and post them through our website so that we can sort of get around all of the great things that you're kind of raising. And we'll post that alongside a lovely film of this webinar.
Great. Well, thank you. Yes, I'd just like to say thanks to everyone, all of our speakers in the Plastic Waste Hub and doing all our researchers. I think you'll agree they're all doing a brilliant job at trying to find out the answers to these really knotty questions, working with, and we'd like to thank our funders, obviously, and you all for tuning in and listening and sending us questions and making us think different things, because it's so important, you know, to not be in a silo. And we, you know, that's part of the reason why I have these webinars, is to really open ourselves up so that you can ask us questions we haven't asked ourselves. So thank you everyone for doing that, and all our industrial partners and our policy partners. It's great working with you all, and looking forward to continuing to do so. See you at the next one, which we hope to put, well, we will have in the spring next year. And we'll tell you what we've done for the last 6 months. I hopefully answered some of your questions. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.